Hey guys, tonight we're unrolling a parchment that's been sitting in the sand for centuries. We're tracing the quiet, careful handwriting of women who lived in sun-baked towns far from Europe's parchment-laden abbeys or China's scroll-lined archives. Welcome to the world of the forgotten female scribes of West Africa. Picture this. You're walking through the dust-swirled streets of 15th century Timbuktu. It's just before dawn. The stars still cling to the sky like stubborn candle wax, and the air smells like warm earth-old ink and something baking a few doors down. You pass rows of low mud brick buildings with flat roofs, doors painted indigo shutters cracked open. The ground crunches under your sandals. A donkey snorts in its sleep. This town is quiet now, but not asleep. Somewhere, someone is already reading. You might think of Timbuktu as a punchline so far away, it might as well be Timbuktu. But tonight, you're in the real one. And no, you probably won't survive the dust, the heat, or the goat-stealing wind. That's okay. You're here to listen, not to sweat. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sand isn't just sand here, it's layered with stories. Manuscripts hidden in trunks under beds, scrolls wrapped in cloth and passed between cousins, prayers scrawled in Arabic on camel bone, contracts drawn up by women who signed with steady hands and firm strokes. You step into a small, windowless library built from thick red earth. It's early, so there's no one around yet. But the room feels full of pages, full of breath. You can almost hear the turning of folios, the soft clink of ink pots, the scratch of a reed pen against tanned sheepskin. This place, like hundreds of others across the medieval West African Sahel, is home to manuscripts that span centuries. Documents of law, poetry, astronomy, medicine, theology. Some copied and recopied by generations of scribes. And some of those scribes, women. You don't see them in many textbook footnotes. You won't find their names carved into marble, but you will see their fingerprints pressed into pages. Their margin notes correcting the mistakes of tired brothers. Their poetic flourishes curled like henna across the final blessing line of a prayer scroll. You settle onto a low bench. The cushions are lumpy but warm. Someone's been here recently, maybe last night. Maybe a girl sneaking time between chores to finish a transcription before dawn. Maybe her mother helped her spell out the longer words. There's a myth that West African history was purely oral, that everything was passed down by griots and never written. And yes, griots, those epic musical historians, are a vital part of the culture. But they weren't the only ones keeping memory alive. Historians still argue whether the libraries of Timbuktu and Djenné were truly widespread in earlier centuries or concentrated among the elite. Some say thousands of manuscripts were penned in every home. Others insist it was a scholar's game, rare and ritualized. But what's clear is, there were female scribes, and many of them were erased. Not because their work wasn't valuable, but because they weren't considered the right kind of person to remember. You pause and run a finger along the edge of a bound manuscript. The leather is worn. The script faded but legible. There's a line of delicate text written sideways in the margin. A correction, a commentary, a small joke in Arabic script, and there just beneath it a name, smudged, half rubbed away. It starts with Amin. You smile. Close enough. In towns like Ouagadougou and even Agadez, documents have surfaced with notes attributed to women. Marriage contracts, dowry lists, land deeds, copies of prayers where the handwriting shifts mid-page. One style steady and formal, the other more fluid, more decorative. Probably a daughter learning under her mother's eye, You step back into the street. Morning is rising over the rooftops. A rooster determined to impress no one lets out a weak caw. The market is stirring. A boy jogs past with a clay jug sloshing water onto his sandals. A woman sweeps the step outside a bookshop. Inside that shop, rows of bound volumes, some copied by men, some whispers, say by wives, sisters, mothers. Women who learned to read so they could teach. Women who taught so they could remember. And women who remembered so they could write it all down. There's something powerful in that. Something steady, like ink that refuses to fade even after the author's name has. You settle on a ledge by the mosque wall and close your eyes. The breeze is warmer now. The sand tastes faintly like spice, and the scrolls are still whispering. They want to tell you more. You wake to the sound of weaving. It's not loud, more of a shush-shush, like someone brushing the surface of memory with a reed broom. The loom is tucked in the back of a mud-walled courtyard beneath a canopy of dried palm fronds. The threads stretch tight like harp strings, and a woman hums softly as she works. This isn't your first stop, but it's an important one. Because while tonight's journey is about scribes, not spinners, you're starting to realize they're more connected than you thought. You watch her a moment. Her fingers are fast but careful. The cloth she's making is striped indigo and ochre dyed with leaves and riverbed clay. There's rhythm in her movements, a pattern, almost like handwriting. In many parts of medieval West Africa, women were the keepers of both fabric and family stories. They passed down not only lullabies and herbal knowledge, but sometimes quietly literacy. You walk a little further down the alleyway. The scent of shea butter and millet porridge lingers in the air. Someone's grinding grains in a wooden mortar. A goat bleats its grievances behind a mud brick fence, and there nestled between two garden walls is a household school. It's not marked. There's no sign. But you can tell what it is by the low recitation of verses, the scratch of styluses on wooden boards. A dozen girls, some wide-eyed, some half-dozing, trace Arabic letters into wet clay, copying after an older woman in a russet robe who speaks slowly, firmly. This scene feels like a small miracle, and yet for centuries it wasn't rare. While the better-known manuscript libraries of Timbuktu were stocked by wealthy male scholars, many families, especially merchant families, educated their daughters. Not always for fame or official jobs, but for lineage, for trade, for prayer. You peer over a girl's shoulder. Her fingers are stained with ink. Her stylus is worn at the tip. She glances at you and grins, then goes back to writing the basmala in the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful. It's her third try. You give her a nod of encouragement. Across West Africa, particularly in Mali and Mauritania, documents have been found that show women acting as witnesses, clerks, and in rare cases, legal scholars. The manuscripts of Chingeti and Tichit contain letters attributed to women often managing trade or mediating disputes. And where there are letters, there are scribes. You follow the sound of laughter to a courtyard where a young woman sits with a thick-bound manuscript on her lap. She's copying a page, her toes flexed against the dirt for balance. Her pen is a reed, her inkpot a glazed bowl tucked into the ground beside her. Her handwriting is stunning, tall, looping, confident. Beside her, a small boy dozes in the sun, head on a folded robe. She glances up as you approach, and without missing a beat, keeps writing. Her expression is focused, but calm. You get the sense she's done this 100 times before. Maybe more. There's a particular kind of patience in her gaze, the kind that comes from watching words appear slowly, line by line. Historians still argue whether women in medieval West Africa were systematically trained as scribes, you whisper to yourself, or whether they just slipped into the role through proximity. But in a way, that's the wrong question, because what's clear is that they wrote, even if they didn't call themselves scribes, even if no one else did, even if history forgot to. You sit near the well and sip a bit of sweetened tea someone left out. The cup is chipped. The tea is perfect. You remember something from earlier, an oral tradition from the Tuareg people that tells of the ink of women, a phrase used to describe secret wisdom written into fabric recipes and lullabies. It wasn't about parchment. It was about permanence. And maybe that's what you're really chasing here. Not just forgotten facts, but evidence of a way of life. You walk again. The sun is higher now. Dust spins through the air like scattered punctuation. In the shade of a fig tree, two older women sit spinning cotton and speaking in hushed tones. One pulls out a narrow piece of folded parchment and hands it to the other. They unfold it like it's made of gold. You catch the last line before it vanishes back into cloth. She wrote it so we'd remember. No signature, no stamp, but written nonetheless. And read, and passed along. You exhale slowly. The breeze lifts your scarf. Somewhere in the distance, a call to prayer threads itself through the alleyways. You pause, not because the day demands it, but because the rhythm does. You sit on a cool stone and close your eyes. You picture the girls and their clayboards, the women and their reed pens, the unmarked letters that survive in the spines of forgotten books. And you realize something strange. These female scribes weren't rare. They were just quiet, and their words, still here, still humming beneath the sand, still stitching together what history forgot to remember. You wake to the smell of smoke and ink. Not fire, just the warm, earthy scent of lamp-black ink simmering over a coal brazier, mixed with the faint sharpness of goat parchment. Someone nearby is preparing tools. Not modern pens or ballpoints, but reed quills split and carved with a practiced thumb. And you, as usual, are not in your own time. You're in a compound just outside Jenne, sometime in the 15th century, when the city is alive with scholars, merchants, and yes, manuscripts. Lots of manuscripts. You roll up from your mat and pad barefoot into the courtyard, where low mud brick walls glow amber in the early light. A woman crouches beside the brazier, stirring a dark mixture in a shallow pan. She's adding soot, a little gum arabic, a drop of water from a pottery jug. Her hands move with the confidence of someone who's done this hundreds of times. She's not just making ink, she's making memory. Across from her, a girl fans the flame gently with a strip of folded leather. She's maybe 10, maybe 11, already learning how the world is recorded. Not through laws or edicts, but through the curve of a letter, the patience of a page. Ink in West Africa is not just a tool, it's a ceremony. There's rhythm to how it's mixed, how it's stored in small gourd pots wrapped in leather. There are stories about the best soot coming from certain kinds of lamps, about how ink mixed during the early morning lasts longer, about how you must never speak while making it, or the letters will argue on the page. You smile at that last one, because you've definitely read some angry-looking calligraphy in your time. You step into the writing room, one of many attached to the mosque complex. It's shaded by palm beams and filled with low stools, slanted boards, and carefully arranged stacks of parchment. A few scribes are already at work, dipping pens, murmuring verses, correcting each other softly. Among them a woman. She's older than the rest. Her back is straight, her robes neat, her head wrapped in indigo-dyed cloth. A scribe's cloth, if you know what to look for. She doesn't glance up. She doesn't need to. She knows you're watching. Her pen moves in deliberate arcs, forming the elegant Maghrebi script that marks so many West African manuscripts. Curved, slanted, looping letters that speak without vowels, that expect the reader to meet them halfway. She's copying from memory. You can tell. Her source lies closed at her side. And yet the words appear line by line, perfectly spaced, confidently inked. This is not just transcription. This is performance. Calligraphy was a sacred art here, as much about devotion as preservation. The Quran, of course, was the center of it all. But other works too, science, poetry, medicine, legal contracts, family records, passed through hands like hers. Hands ink-stained, precise, and often overlooked. You crouch beside her desk. There's a list unfurling across the page, names, dates, perhaps donations or property lines. Her handwriting is smaller now, tighter, more functional, still beautiful. You whisper, "Who taught you?" She doesn't answer, but a younger scribe sitting nearby grins and says, "Her grandmother." Of course, because writing here isn't just passed down in formal classes, it's inherited, embedded in the rhythm of the household, especially among merchant families, especially in urban centers where trade routes meet scholarship and everything gets exchanged: gold, salt, and sometimes literacy. Historians still argue whether female scribes in this region worked professionally or informally, whether they were exceptions or part of a quiet tradition, whether the absence of their names in official records means they weren't there or just weren't noticed. But the manuscripts say otherwise, and so do the margins. You pull a text off the shelf, carefully, reverently. It's wrapped in soft leather and tied with dyed string. When you open it, a pressed flower falls out. And then beside the final line of a verse on astronomy, you find a note in a different hand, copied with care by Isatu, daughter of Hafsa, on the morning before the rains. A record not of the author, but the copyist, a quiet claim to presence. A woman's name written in the margin of time. You tuck the flower back in place and return the book to its shelf. The wind outside stirs lifting dust from the stone walkway. Someone brings in water. Someone else begins reciting a verse, soft and low. And the woman continues writing, unbothered, unhurried, unforgotten. You sit for a while and watch. Watch the way she rests her pen between fingers. The way she dips it without thinking. The way her lips move silently, matching each letter. This is what the beginning of the day looks like when time is kept in pages. When silence isn't just absence, but intention. When a single letter shaped just right becomes an offering. Not to history, but to now, because writing, especially the kind that survives, isn't always about being seen. Sometimes it's about seeing, and she sees you. Finally, she glances up, smiles faintly, and says, "There's more ink if you're ready." You take the seat. She nods toward just a small stool, the kind that makes your knees ache if you sit too long, but somehow still feels right. The writing board before you is smooth from years of use, darkened where countless palms have rested. There's already a reed pen laid out. Already a pot of ink. She knew you'd say yes. You dip the pen. It's clumsy at first. Your hand doesn't know this angle, this weight. Your letters come out crooked, a little too eager. But no one laughs. No one corrects. The woman, her name you'll learn later, is Ndai, just goes back to her work beside you, letting your scratchy lines join the room's rhythm. There's something deeply generous about that. Outside, the sun is stretching itself over Jenne's rooftops. You can hear the marketplace, waking voices, bartering roosters, announcing themselves like they invented dawn donkeys, protesting their burdens. It's a city alive with color and dust. But in here, it's still soft, still sacred. You trace letters slowly, then again. You're not copying anything specific, just practicing shapes, letting your hand learn the tempo. Ndai leans over once to adjust your grip, says nothing, but shows you with her fingers how to hold the reed gentler, how not to press, how to let the page receive the ink. This is not about speed, it's about intention. Meanwhile, other scribes file in, men, mostly in indigo robes and worn sandals, their faces still carrying sleep. They greet Ndai with a nod. A few greet you, too curious, but not surprised. This room has seen many learners. It expects them. One of them, a young man with a chipped tooth and cheerful eyes, unrolls a long scroll and begins repairing the edges with a needle and fine thread. His name is Malik. He hums while he works. You don't recognize the melody, but it fits. It's what this place sounds like when no one's watching. Your fingers are stained now, a splotch of ink on your thumb, another across your sleeve, and weirdly you don't mind, because here ink is like memory, messy, persistent, impossible to wash out entirely. You start to wonder how many scribes carried their stains like badges. How many wore the mark of their labor into markets and homes and prayers? You glance around. There's a shelf near the far wall stacked with texts waiting to be copied. Not Qurans this time, but legal documents, land ownership, marriage contracts, dowries, inheritance disputes. This too was the scribe's world, not just verses and visions, but the mundane details of daily life. And women wrote these too. There's evidence subtle scattered of female scribes who specialized in contracts, who understood the language of property negotiation lineage, who could write a marriage clause with enough clarity to avoid 10 years of family arguments. Historians still argue whether this was common or rare, whether these women were trained within their own households or apprenticed formally, whether their names disappeared because they weren't valued or because it simply didn't occur to anyone to record them. But the work remains, and the signatures sometimes. A woman named Aminata, who notarized a grain contract in 1451. Another called Yasin, who witnessed the sale of a camel and wrote her name with a flourish that clearly meant business. You copy one of these names, now practicing the loop of the ya and the long downward sweep of the sin. And I watches and gives a small nod. You're starting to understand how this works. Every letter's a thread, and every thread, when handled with care, ties you to someone who came before. Malik finishes mending his scroll and stretches his arms with a groan. Tea, he asks the room. There's a chorus of yeses. He disappears, sandals flapping. You set down your pen. Outside, the market is in full swing now. You can hear goats, someone shouting about dates, someone else laughing big and booming like they've just remembered a good joke after forgetting it for 20 years. And Dai is rolling up her manuscript. The parchment curls willingly like it's done this dance before. She secures it with a dyed cord, ties it twice, and places it on the shelf labeled in dark ink, complete, not final. You raise an eyebrow at that. She shrugs. There's always something to fix. Perfection was never the point here. Preservation was. Transmission. The belief that knowledge deserves hands to carry it forward. Even imperfect hands, especially those. Tea arrives in small chipped cups, strong and sweet and blisteringly hot. Malik passes them around with a grin. Careful. This one bites. You sip, burn your tongue a little, nod in thanks. Then Ende says, come. She leads you out of the scriptorium through a shaded hallway into a small room lit only by a sliver of sky. There's a box here, wooden locked, clearly important. She kneels, unlocks it, and lifts the lid. Inside are wrapped bundles of parchment, older than the others. You recognize the script. It's like hers, but rougher, cramped, as if written in haste or urgency. She unwraps one, revealing a contract between two families dated nearly 100 years ago. My mother's work, she says, and then another. Her mother's. You don't say anything. You just watch. These aren't artifacts to her. They're relatives. And in the quiet that follows, you realize the most powerful kind of archive isn't stored in glass cases. It's passed hand to hand, flame to flame, story to story. Endai replaces the documents, ties them gently, and closes the box. You should keep practicing, she says. Ink likes company. You nod. She smiles. And for the first time, you feel like a scribe. Not just a tourist in time, but part of the rhythm, the hum, the hush, the hand that remembers. Word count 185. Awaiting continue. Banjan noi continue. Chat GPT jan noi, section paith. You return to the scriptorium with your pulse quieter and your step more certain. The cup of tea still warms your hand, and the name Aminata is ghosting on your tongue. The room has filled out more now, low murmurs, shifting pages, the gentle scrape of knife against parchment as someone carefully scrapes away an error. You settle back in at your place. Your reed pen waits. It's not flashy, this work. There are no parades for a scribe, no statues, no songs. Only cramped fingers and the quiet click of things falling into place, letter by letter, line by line, life by life. And yet this is where history happens. not just in palaces, but on pages. You begin again. Today, Ndai slides a different kind of text toward you. It's a collection of proverbs written in both Arabic and a local language Pular. The lines aren't straight, and the ink has faded in parts, but you can feel the texture of a voice in the words. Someone trying to capture wisdom before it drifted away like smoke. You copy carefully, and you start to realize this isn't translation. It's transcription, not just of language, but of rhythm, of worldview, of how people once measured the weight of a word, a proverb about rain, another about debt. One that simply reads, "A goat does not bite the path it walks." You don't know what that means yet, but it feels true. You glance across the room. An older man is using a heated pebble to flatten curled parchment. Beside him, a girl maybe 12 is copying short lines onto palm fronds. Her posture is better than yours. Her lines straighter. She looks up once, and you exchange that brief mutual nod that says yes. We're both scribes now. In medieval West Africa, especially in centers like Timbuktu Gao and Djenné, manuscript culture thrived in ways that baffle modern assumptions. Not just religious texts, but math, astronomy, law, medicine, poetry, and yes, proverbs. Hundreds of thousands of handwritten manuscripts still exist. Many are still being uncovered, tucked away in family trunks and earthen jars, each one a miracle of survival. And here's the secret. A surprising number of them bear signs of female authorship or stewardship. Historians still argue whether women in medieval West African scholarly circles were formally trained or simply inherited the craft through family lines. Some point to oral traditions that name mothers and daughters passing down scripts. Others reference archival notations in female handwriting. A few skeptics say it's all wishful reading, that female scribe is too generous a title for what may have been casual or secretive labor. But the ink is there. The hands were real. You pause in your copying and flex your fingers. Your knuckles pop. Your thumb has that familiar cramp now. And still you want to keep going. There's a woman you learn about later, not today, but her story lingers even now. Her name was Fatoumata. She lived near modern-day Mopti in the 16th century. She wasn't a scholar by training, but she was married to a teacher who was often away giving lectures, so she copied his texts at home. Quietly. Perfectly. Until one day she added a note at the end of a treatise on trade law. This was copied by my hand while the rain came. That's it. A weather report and a signature. And yet what a flare in the fog of time. That note tells you she was there. That she saw the world not only in ink, but in season. That she balanced knowledge with rainstorms and maybe a pot of millet simmering in the corner. That she believed her hand mattered enough to name. You copy the line into your own notes quietly. This was copied by my hand while the rain came. Outside, the market has thinned. The heat has risen. The smells have changed from bread and spice to dust and iron. Someone is hammering something in the distance. A rhythm all its own. Ndai sits beside you again. She's holding a different book now, bound in soft leather, the kind that smells like story. She opens it gently, revealing a collection of poems. No names, just verses. Some in Arabic, some in Tamashek. One with beautiful looping script and decorative dots shaped like birds. You ask who wrote these. She says we think Mariam or her sister. But it's hard to say. You nod. Of course it is. So much of women's history is like that. Traces, guesswork, the echo of a name almost lost. You read a line aloud. The stars do not envy the lantern. They are only glad it learned to shine. It's a good line. You copy that too. There's a section in the book, written on dyed paper, deep ochre with silver ink, so faint it shimmers only when tilted. You tilt it. Read slowly. The words are devotional, but not religious in the strictest sense. More like praise poems for the work itself. To write is to wait with purpose, one line says. You pause. Look up. The scriptorium is full of people waiting with purpose, for the ink to dry, for the rain to pass, for the page to fill. Malik walks by and drops a folded note beside you. You open it. Inside, in crooked polar script, it reads, "You're not terrible at this." You smile. It's possibly the highest praise in this building. You finish copying your page and Ndai signs off the margin with a swirl of blue. "It's yours now," she says. You made it happen. You don't really believe her. Not yet. But you tuck the page into your folder anyway, because you're starting to learn the rhythm of brush, of breath, of remembering someone else's words with your own hand. Outside, a bird calls once, then twice, then silence again. It's the kind of moment you know will fade. But for now, you let it linger. You wake the next morning with ink still on your fingers. It's in the creases in that tiny place between the pad of your thumb and forefinger. You rub at it without thinking, then pause because you kind of like it there. A quiet badge. A reminder that yesterday wasn't a dream or a game or some museum field trip where you squint at old things behind glass. It happened. You wrote, and you're going to do it again. Today is warmer, dustier. You tug a scarf over your mouth as you make your way to the scriptorium. The air smells like heated stone and the sharp spice of crushed tamarind pods drying on a roof nearby. The narrow alleyways twist and shimmer slightly. This isn't the city's rich quarter, not where gold is weighed or politics whispered, but it's alive. Every wall here is smudged with story. You pass a boy balancing a crate of inkstones, another carrying a roll of parchment nearly as tall as he is. Someone shouts a greeting from a rooftop, and you nod without seeing who it is. You're part of the rhythm now. In the scriptorium, Ndai greets you with a look that says, "You're late," but also doesn't actually mind. She hands you today's work without ceremony, a genealogical record. You raise an eyebrow. She shrugs. Family matters. And it does. In medieval West Africa, lineage isn't just ancestry, it's identity. Especially in societies influenced by Islamic scholarship and traditional griot memory culture. Names are more than labels. They're maps. You unfold the record and find yourself staring at a tangle of relationships. Sons of sons. Daughters of scholars. Marriages between dynasties. A woman named Kadiatu, listed as keeper of the second house, is referenced multiple times. She's not just a wife. She's a node, a hinge in the structure. And next to her name, a small symbol, part glyph, part flower, stands out. Ndai leans over. "That's the sign for Scribe," she says. You blink. Scribe. She nods. Female specifically. At least in this house's system. You trace it with your finger. So there it is, quiet confirmation. A signature that isn't a name. A profession wrapped in a flourish. You copy it into your own notes. You spend the next hour following Kadiatu's thread. Her family moves from a town near Walata to the edge of Gao. They trade in books and textiles. Her daughter Fanta takes up the same work. A note mentions she copied 2 surahs of the Quran during the long dry season with few errors. You wonder how they defined few. Later you come across a poem written in the margin of the family tree. Just a single line. "We name the ones who wrote us down." It stops you, because that's what this is, isn't it? A counterspell to forgetting. And it's not just Kadiatu. Records exist, scattered half-decade of women across West Africa, doing exactly what you're doing now, copying, recording, remembering. Some were part of extended scholarly families, others assistants to imams, midwives, griots. In Timbuktu alone, fragments from the 15th century list several women known to have transcribed religious texts. One named Zara had her own seal. Another Awa was called the soft quill in an archival comment, which sounds like either an insult or the sweetest praise ever. Historians still argue whether such references indicate widespread literacy among women, or whether these were outliers, exceptions proving the rule. Some say they were scholars in their own right. Others insist they were more like caretakers of books than creators of them. But then you remember Fatumata. You remember Kadiatu. You remember the glyph, and you decide the debate can wait. Because this morning the work speaks louder than the arguments. You take a break around midday. Step into the courtyard and sit on the low wall beside the neem tree. The leaves cast shadows like ink stains. And Di joins you munching on something roasted and wrapped in paper. You look like your brain is melting, she says, mouth full. You admit the genealogy record was a bit much. She chuckles. Try copying property taxes sometime. This goat belongs to the cousin of the neighbor who once gave a melon to the uncle of. You both laugh, and the sound feels sacred in its own way. When you return to the desk, something new awaits, a short devotional handwritten in careful lines and attributed at the end to MS Daughter of the Moonlight Seller. You pause, read it twice. It's a meditation on time, the kind that doesn't try to explain it, just sits beside it. One line reads, "When the stars move, I remember my mother's wrist." Another, "The ink is patient. The soul must be too." You ask Ndai if she knows who MS is. She shakes her head. Could be Mariam. Could be Salima too. Could be someone who used initials to stay safe. You frown. She continues. Sometimes you have to hide to be remembered. You copy MS's lines anyway, carefully, lovingly, as if she might be watching. Later, as the light shifts and shadows stretch long over the stone floor, you hear something new, a chant low and rhythmic echoing from an alley. It's not religious. It's an advertisement. A scribe calling out services, wills, poems, love letters, ledgers in a sing-song voice that makes you smile. Even that commerce of the quill is part of the lineage. You close your notebook gently and rest your hand on its cover. Today was a full day, but it didn't feel rushed. It felt like water being poured carefully, steadily into a jar. And now that jar is nearly full. You stand, stretch, and pack your things. You're learning, not just about scribes, not just about women, but about what it means to remember, and what it costs not to. You start your morning in a different part of the city. It's earlier than usual, and the sun hasn't yet baked the dust into heat. You pass traders setting up children chasing each other through narrow corridors, and a donkey that seems genuinely offended by your presence. Today, you're meeting someone new, someone Dai only described as old, sharp, and worth listening to. That turns out to be Madame Halima. You find her in a house wrapped in shadow and vine, the kind of place that smells like dried lemon peels and slow-burning charcoal. Her voice greets you before her face does. "You're late," she says, then laughs at your startled look. "I'm joking. Come, sit." She doesn't ask your name, just hands you a scroll, thin paper brown at the edges wound with a fraying blue ribbon. You hesitate. She waves a hand. It won't bite, but it might sigh. You laugh and unroll it. It's a will, a woman's will, signed with a steady, sloping hand and sealed with what looks like crushed hibiscus dye. The date places it about 400 years ago. You read silently line by line as Halima watches. The woman Aminta lists land books, fabrics, and one small bowl blue-glazed to go to the daughter of my former teacher. And at the end, a final line. Let this be copied by the woman with the clear hands. You glance up. Halima smiles. A scribe. Aminta had a female scribe, which means that copy the one you're holding isn't the original, and yet it carries the same heart. You read again, slower this time. This wasn't just a document. It was an offering, a final piece of authorship. And Aminta trusted a woman to carry it forward. Historians still argue whether such records were common practice or rare exceptions. Some say women could only copy when supervised. Others claim families in certain cities actively trained daughters in literacy to keep knowledge in the house. Halima just shrugs. We always wrote, she says. They just didn't always save it. She leads you to a back room, darker cooler filled with bundles wrapped in waxed cloth. Carefully, she unwraps one and shows you what's inside loose pages. Hundreds, maybe more. Some cracked and brittle, others still soft to the touch. Recovered from a family house near Jenne, she says. You stare. She continues. They were going to burn them. Said they were too old to matter. But someone called me. You want to ask how she got them, but you don't. Because what matters now is what's here. You pick up a page at random. It's a poem long and uneven, but full of rhythm. Halfway down the page, there's a sketch, a woman with her hand on a child's head. No name, no signature. But the care in the lines is unmistakable. You look up. Who drew this? Halima shrugs. Who knows, could be the poet. Could be the scribe. Could be her granddaughter doodling. You smile, all worth remembering. She nods. Exactly. She places another page in front of you. This one is harder to decipher. The script is tighter, more formal. Arabic calligraphy, but not like you've seen before. The strokes are floral, almost soft. You squint, and there tucked between the lines of text is a tiny symbol. You recognize it, the same glyph you saw near Kadiatu's name. You trace it again, this time more carefully. Halima says she was a traveler, that scribe. Her work shows up in at least 3 towns, maybe more. We think she learned from her aunt. You sit with that thought. An aunt teaching her niece to hold the reed pen steady, to dry the ink just so, to roll the parchment gently before the words could smear. All those details passed from hand to hand, not because of fame, but because of care. You spend the next few hours sorting, reading, asking, and Halima never rushes you. Eventually she says, "You hungry?" You are. You hadn't realized it. She brings out bread and spiced lentils and a tea so strong it might be plotting something. You sit outside her door, eating quietly as the street begins to warm. A boy walks past with a basket full of reeds. A girl hurries by carrying ink in a calabash bowl. You imagine them future scribes maybe, or maybe just errand runners today. But touched somehow by this world of writing, Halima asks you a question you weren't expecting. What's the first word you ever wrote? You pause. You think it might have been your name, or maybe the name of someone you loved. Maybe even hello. She nods. Most people start that way. Then she adds. But the important thing isn't what you write first. It's what you write when no one's watching. That stays with you. Later, when you return to your own space, you write that down. And then you write more. Not just about the women you've met on paper and in memory, but about what it feels like to be part of their story now. You don't know what you'll do with it yet, but it feels right to let it out. The ink stains your fingers again, and this time you don't even try to wipe it off. You dream of ink that night. Not dramatic rivers or splashes across a page, just a slow, steady line tracing the edge of a name. A script unspooling like thread across parchment, gentle and sure. You wake with the shape of a letter still curling in your mind, unsure if it was Arabic ajami or something else entirely. But it was beautiful. The morning is quiet again. You stretch, yawn, and step out into air that smells faintly of charcoal and wet clay. The streets are still stretching too, vendors yawning into their stalls, roosters declaring things no one asked them to. You make your way back to the Central Library of Timbuktu. You've been granted another session with the manuscripts. Inside, it's cooler, dimmer, sacred in that quiet library kind of way. You nod to the archivist, a man with thoughtful eyes and a feather tucked in his pocket like a charm. He leads you to a different set of shelves today. Women's writing, he says simply. The collection is smaller than the others. Some volumes wrapped in fraying silk. Others bear their leather covers, cracked and softened by touch. You sit on the floor, legs folded, hands careful. The first book you open is a ledger. Trade records, you think at first glance. But the names, all women. Grain fabric beads, yes, but also ink paper and time for copying. You trace a line that reads, 3 afternoons by the river paid in thread and honey. You smile. That doesn't sound like a transaction. That sounds like memory. Like someone hiring a scribe who prefers open air and sunlight on the page. Historians still argue whether these ledgers count as literature or just economic ephemera. But you're not sure the division matters. If a woman wrote it, if she claimed space for her hand and her voice, then it belongs in the story. The next page is more personal, a recipe, or maybe a prayer. You can't tell which. It begins with measurements, cloves, dried orange, peel the ashes of a specific leaf, and ends with the line for peace in the house and clarity in the heart. The script is careful, a little shaky, as if someone older was writing it or someone nervous. You want to know who she was, what peace she was trying to make, and here another note folded inside the back cover, barely hanging on. A line in a jami. This ink is made from myrtle and waiting, that word again, waiting. So many of these voices lived in the space between moments, between duties, between what they were expected to do and what they dreamed of doing. You move through the pages slowly, each one a soft knock from history saying, I was here too. There's one entry in particular that holds you. It's a fragment, half a letter really, to my sister who reads faster than I copy. It continues, may your thoughts be bolder than my pen, and may your name last longer than mine. You read it again and again. It's unsigned, unfinished, but full. You close the book gently, like placing a hand over someone's heartbeat. Later, while you're talking with the archivist over tea, he tells you a story. A woman once wrote a poem, he says. She was tired. She wrote it on a grain bag because there was no paper. Her husband traded the bag before she could copy the lines. She searched for it for years, never found it. But the story, we remember that. You sip your tea and nod. Sometimes memory outlasts ink. Sometimes the act of trying is the legacy. That afternoon, you find yourself sitting under a neem tree watching two girls play with sticks in the sand. One draws letters. The other copies them slower, giggling when she messes up. A boy passes by with a basket of clay tablets. A goat tries to eat the corner of your shawl. You swat it away gently, and you think nothing has changed, and everything has. The women who wrote were once just girls curious about shape and sound. They didn't start out with grand ambitions. They started with one line, one story, one bowl of ink balanced on a table that probably wobbled. You make your way back to Madame Halima's house. She greets you with a raised eyebrow and a plate of roasted peanuts. You've been reading, she says, though you haven't said a word. You nod. She pours you tea. You ask her what she remembers about the first woman scribe she ever learned of. She doesn't answer right away, then says she was never named in the books. But her handwriting was too soft to be a man's. You both laugh. You can tell. Oh, absolutely. The men use their pens like they were shouting. The women, she draws a curve in the air with her finger, they whispered. You sit with that. She disappears for a minute and returns with a thin scroll. Keep this, she says. You open it. It's blank. You glance at her. It's for the story you haven't written yet. You swallow past the lump in your throat. She pats your shoulder. Don't wait too long. Ink dries. Memory doesn't. That night you light your own candle. You stare at the page for a while, then write one line, and the next, and another. You don't worry about being perfect. You think of the women who wrote between chores, between children, between what was expected and what was possible. You write for them. You write with them. And your fingers smell faintly of ink again. You wake before dawn again, not because you have to, but because now part of you wants to. The air feels gentler in the pre-light hush. The world is quiet, like it's holding its breath just for a second longer before beginning again. The room smells like dust and distant jasmine. You stretch, roll your shoulders, and reach for your notebook, not the modern kind, with coils and lines, but a soft leather folio that Madame Halima insisted you use. Paper should feel like something she said, handing it to you like a secret. Outside, the streets of Timbuktu are just beginning to stir. You pass a boy sweeping sand from his family's doorstep. You nod, he nods. And in that exchange, something ancient hums between you. You head back toward the library, but take the long way this time. Past the well-worn alleyways, past the mud brick walls that lean just slightly from years of wind and sun, past the women who are already setting up market baskets, wrapping fried millet into banana leaves, talking softly with each other, laughing in that early morning way that suggests the best gossip always arrives with the sun. Your destination this morning isn't the main manuscript room. It's a side chamber, smaller, cooler, less visited. Inside, stacked in a crooked, slightly haphazard pyramid, are what scholars like to call orphaned pages, fragments, torn bits of parchment, ink blots, lists, half-letters, marginalia that wandered off and never returned home. This is your favorite room, because in here the forgotten gets a second chance. You sit on the stone bench and begin carefully sifting through the piles. The first is a recipe for hair oil scribbled in the margins of what appears to be a treatise on camel breeding. The second is a lullaby written phonetically, clearly meant to be sung by someone who didn't quite know the letters, but knew the rhythm by heart. Then you find a page that stops you. It's small, hand-sized. On one side, neat, almost cramped script in ajami. On the other, a child's drawing. Just stick figures dancing in a circle. A sun in the corner. One figure has lines trailing behind it like a cape, and you feel it. That tug. Someone, probably a woman, maybe a scribe, had been writing on one side of the paper while her child played with the other. Or maybe it was the opposite. Maybe the child had claimed the paper first, and the mother wrote around the art, refusing to waste a single blank space. You smile. This isn't just a document. It's a moment. A Tuesday, maybe. Or a Saturday afternoon when the sun was too hot for errands, and someone sat near the window with a pen and a fidgety child, and made time work for them both. Historians still argue whether these kinds of finds count as important. Some claim only full manuscripts deserve cataloging. Others insist every scrap matters. You know where you stand. Everything matters, especially the things no one meant to save. You keep flipping. More fragments. A grocery list in 3 different inks. A note that simply reads, "Don't forget the goat." You find a piece of a larger manuscript, just one paragraph intact, praising a woman named Amina for her graceful hand and merciful corrections. That line, written by someone else, tells you she didn't just write, she edited. She mentored. She helped others shape their words into something stronger. You make a note of her name. She deserves to be remembered. You pause for tea this time under the shade of a half-broken arch, where lizards dart between the bricks and time moves slow on purpose. Madame Halima finds you there. "You've been quiet," she says. You hand her your notebook. She flips through the page's lines about the fragment sketches of the drawing, your own thoughts scribbled in the margins like you've caught the habit yourself. She doesn't say anything at first, just sips her tea. Then softly, "They're with you now." You nod, because they are. The women who stitched prayers into letters. The ones who sold ink for goats and copied legal contracts on borrowed time. The ones who wrote poems in the corners of pages and tucked warnings between records and taught their daughters how to shape sounds into syllables. They're here, with you, inside you. In the movement of your pen, in the rhythm of your steps, in the way you now listen for stories, in places most people never bother to look. You return to the orphaned pages that afternoon with new eyes. You start organizing them not by theme or neatness or script, but by tone. The funny ones, the worried ones, the ones that feel like letters no one ever sent. You discover a fragment that ends in mid-sentence. "Tell her that I..." You stare at that line for too long. Tell her what? That she mattered, that the ink ran out, that she should come home. You don't finish it. You leave it be. Not everything needs to be completed to be understood. That night, you sit on the rooftop, legs dangling over the side notebook on your knees, stars overhead, like scattered punctuation marks. You think about the idea of legacy, not the grand kind, written in stone or marble or epic poems, but the softer kind, the breath on a page, the sound of a name whispered during tea, The rhythm passed down through memory and ink. That's what these women left, not monuments, moments. And now that you've found them, they'll never be quite so lost again. The stars are fading. You watch the sky soften pale blue, brushing out the black, a quiet unraveling of the night above Timbuktu. The rooftop still holds the last breath of the cool desert air, and below you the city begins to stretch. You tuck your notebook into the satchel that once held someone else's prayers, and rise slowly joints, reluctant but content. You're not in a rush, because today you're not headed for manuscripts. You're headed for the marketplace. Not the part with baskets and salt, and that one chicken that keeps escaping, though, let's be honest, you'll probably pass by her. No, today you're seeking something rarer: oral memory, living archives. Because for every scribe who etched words onto vellum, there were a dozen others who whispered history into their daughters' ears, who sang their lineage while grinding millet, who remembered when memory was the only safe place to keep something sacred. You weave your way through the stalls: dried hibiscus, bundles of incense, leather sandals. Someone's laughing in the distance and the sun climbs higher, nudging the scent of spices into your hair. You reach a corner near the northern gate, shaded by a cloth awning, where a woman sits with a spindle in one hand and an audience of 3 in the other. She's old, very old, the kind of age that gets mistaken for legend. Her eyes are sharp, her voice velvet over gravel. She's telling a story, something about a girl who tricked a snake out of a poem. You wait, not because you don't want to interrupt, but because stories like this don't ask to be paused. They end when they're ready. And when she finishes, she fixes those ancient eyes on you. "Ah," she says, "the one with the ink-stained sleeves." You check your arm. Sure enough, yesterday's manuscript smudges are still visible. You smile. She pats the ground beside her. You sit. "You're looking for the ones who wrote with silence," she says. You nod. The women. She doesn't laugh. She nods too, and begins. It's not a lecture, not a list, but something softer, something richer, woven from names and songs and memories that never needed parchment to survive. She speaks of women who taught under trees, of girls who remembered entire genealogies by melody, of widows who brokered land sales and wrote contracts no man dared dispute, of midwives who documented every birth by scratching the name into clay and smoothing it again after the child's naming ceremony, because even time should wait for identity. You take notes, but only sometimes. Mostly you just listen, because her voice is an archive, each word a chapter, each pause a margin note. Historians, she mutters at one point, still argue whether the ones who didn't write in books should count. She spits softly into the dust. They counted. She leans in close. But they left their marks in breath, not ink. You ask her name. She says, "They call me Mama Wura." Gold. Of course they do. You visit Mama Wura every day for a week. Sometimes she tells you stories. Sometimes she gives you tasks. Today she hands you a pouch of crushed indigo and tells you to dye your own cloth. Because scribes need uniforms. Another day, she instructs you to walk the perimeter of the city and listen for what the wind knows. You hear bees, goats, laughter, and argument about mangoes and something that might be a prayer or a curse. Write it down anyway, she says when you return. On your final day, she ties a thin braid into your hair and says, "Now you remember." You don't ask what she means. You just do. You return to the library with new ears. The manuscripts sound different now, as if you can hear what the ink didn't say. You begin comparing written records with the oral tales Mama Wura shared, and the overlaps are astonishing. A name here, a phrase there, a mention of the woman with the silver comb that turns up in both a legal contract and a wedding song. This is where things get real, because now you have something scholars crave, a pattern, a convergence, evidence, but also not quite, because the women who passed these stories down never asked to be dissected, annotated, categorized. They weren't writing for you, or for history, or for the archives. They were just remembering, so you proceed carefully. You draft an article, but not the usual kind. You title it Invisible Ink, tracing the breath-written histories of West African women. And at the top you quote Mama Wura, they counted. You send it to a small journal that specializes in cultural memory. You expect to wait 6 months for a reply. It arrives in 3 weeks. Accepted. They call it poignant and provocatively uncertain. You smile at the phrase. It's the best kind. Because the deeper you dive into the world of forgotten scribes, the more you realize certainty was never the point. Presence was. A woman once braided history into a girl's hair. A song once kept a lineage alive. A scrap of fabric once marked a birth no book recorded. And you're just one more stitch in the cloth. The wind kicks up again. You close the window gently, and you whisper, I remember. You begin your morning in the scriptorium, not with a pen, but with fabric. The indigo cloth Mama Wura gave you still smells like the market, like heat and dust, and a spice you couldn't name if you tried. You spread it across your desk, smoothing the wrinkles with your palm. It's not for decoration. It's an offering, a grounding. You rest your elbows on it and begin to read again. This time you aren't hunting for facts. You're reading like a scribe listens to an elder carefully, with your breath slowed and your ears tuned to what might be missing between the lines. The manuscript before you is a legal document written in the 1500s in Songhai script, dealing with a land inheritance dispute between 2 brothers. It's formal, precise, boring if you don't know what to look for. But you do now. In the margins a note, small, light, almost an afterthought. The wife of Umar witnessed this at dawn. You blink, that's all it says. No name, just the wife of Umar. But there it is, a woman present. She was there, which means she mattered. You lean back in your chair and think about all the women whose names never made it to the page, but whose breath, whose memory, whose presence stitched every event into being. The scholars call this paratext. The stuff around the text. The notes, the scribbles, the smudges. You start spending your days hunting for it, those peripheral traces where women whisper back from the margins. A line break that repeats in 3 different manuscripts, always in the same hand. A signature that's just a symbol, a fish, a leaf, a moon. A section where the script shifts slightly, the letters rounder, more spaced. A change in rhythm. A different scribe. Historians still argue whether these moments mean female scribes were active contributors or just occasional assistants. You don't argue. You know what you see. You begin charting these anomalies, cross-referencing with oral accounts, with known family lineages, with those rare few manuscripts where women are explicitly named as literate. Like Geneba of Gao, a merchant's daughter turned teacher. Her name only appears once in a note scrawled beneath a botanical recipe copied by Geneba before the rains. You love her already. You imagine her perched on a stool leg swinging copying plants onto paper while clouds gathered outside. And then there's Fatumata of Niani, referenced in a scholar's travel log as the woman with too many books and not enough patience, which frankly makes her a saint in your eyes. You find more, too many to be coincidence, too few to satisfy, so you begin to build a new archive, not of manuscripts, but of moments. You create a map of what you call invisible scribes. Those unnamed presences who left fingerprints in footnotes, who altered the angle of the pen, who smoothed the page before ink met paper. It's speculative, yes, but also honest, because the truth isn't always in the big declarations. Sometimes it's in the fact that someone paused long enough to write down a birth, a storm, a borrowed prayer. You keep the cloth on your desk. You find yourself humming one of Mama Wura's songs without realizing it. You get ink on your sleeve again. Lucilla notices and grins. One evening while walking through the library, you discover a small box tucked behind a shelf. Inside a collection of bookmarks, handmade, woven. Some have feathers, others fragments of writing. One is just a braided string with a single shell tied to the end. You ask the archivist about it. Oh, she says those belong to a woman named Nani. She worked here in the 1600s. We think she was a copyist. A copyist. A scribe. A woman. The archivist shrugs. No official records, of course. But her bookmarks show up in over 24 manuscripts. You feel it then, that slow settling breath, the weight of what isn't gone, only waiting. The next morning you pull out one of the messier manuscripts. It's been shelved for decades, too damaged for scholars to bother. But you want it anyway. The pages are brittle, the ink faded, but in the margins notes swirl like vines, short ones, playful. Notations about the weather, a comment on the ugliness of someone's signature, a doodle of a goat wearing what might be a scholar's hat. You don't recognize the hand. You don't need to. You name her anyway, quietly. You whisper you mattered. You write it in your notebook. A new section unknown, Scribes I want to thank. It's long. It keeps growing. You start including these notes in your letters, in your emails. You quote them when you give talks, carefully, gently, always crediting the unknown. You say things like, I believe someone remembered this, even if history didn't. And sometimes the most important witnesses never sign their names. Your peers nod, some frown, some don't respond at all. That's okay. You're not writing for them. You're writing for the hands that held the pen before you, for the fingers that turned the page, for the breath that hovered just briefly before the next word began. And somewhere in the thick heat of the archive, you swear you hear laughter, soft, pleased, like someone just found out they've been seen. You keep going, because the story isn't finished. You wake with the strange realization that you've started dreaming in script. Not like, oh, I dreamed of being a writer, but literally your dreams have become parchment-colored backdrops with long, curling ink lines running across them. Letters you can't quite read, but that feel urgent and beautiful all the same. You blink the sleep away and wonder if this is what those forgotten female scribes felt like, carrying words in their sleep, letting phrases bloom before sunrise, the pulse of language threading their breath even in dreams. You rise slowly. Your room smells like dust and ink and somehow fresh bread. It's not from your kitchen, though. You think maybe your brain is stitching together memory and comfort. Your notebook is still open on the desk. The section labeled Unknown Scribes I Want to Thank is longer than you remember. You flip through your pages and see where yesterday's ink faded at the edges, as if the words themselves were tired. You take a breath, then add another name. You don't know if it's real, but it feels true. Adama, you write. For the line she didn't finish but almost did. Then you tuck your notebook under your arm and head back to the archives. Because today, you've been granted access to the restricted collection. It's kept in a small windowless room, dry, dim, and so quiet, it feels like time gets muffled on entry. The librarian opens the door with a soft good luck and disappears before you can respond. Inside are manuscripts no one's touched in years. Some are too delicate, others too confusing. A few are wrapped in cloth embroidered with names. You pause before the one labeled Timbuktu 1273 5 unsorted. Inside, treasure, and by treasure you mean chaos. Fragments of text, pages torn loose from bindings, ink in 3 different hues, some charcoal black, some rust red, one almost purple. No structure, no index. You sit cross-legged on the floor and begin your ritual one piece at a time. The first leaf is a medical recipe, ginger root honey, and goat's milk for coughs. The second is a poem written sideways in the margin of what was probably a legal document. A love poem. Scandalous but subtle. And then you find it, pressed between 2 stiff pieces of cloth, a single sheet of folded paper. Inside a letter, written in small, precise script, to my sister who writes better than I ever will. You freeze. You reread it twice, 3 times. It's a fragment, obviously, torn from something larger. But that single sentence feels like a spark, like a laugh in a quiet room, like a secret being passed from one hand to another. A sister, a scribe, a compliment. You copy it down word for word, then sit there stunned by the intimacy of that line. It's not a proclamation or a title. It's not an archive stamp or a cataloged entry. It's just one person acknowledging another. And in the history of erased women, that kind of moment is everything. Historians still argue whether letters like these should be considered evidence. Some say yes. Others scoff, arguing that one poetic line doesn't make a case. But you know better now. You've learned to listen to what echoes. Later that day, you find yourself in the marketplace where a seller is unrolling scrolls for tourists. Most of it's modern script made to look antique, but one edge looks off. You lean in. The lettering is Songhai, older than the others, and halfway down is a familiar glyph. A fish drawn sideways. You hold your breath. Could this be a mark from one of your invisible scribes? The vendor shrugs when you ask. Came in a stack from a collector in Bamako. No idea who made it. You buy it, not because you're certain, but because something inside you glows a little when you hold it. Back at the archive, you compare it to your notes. The fish appears twice elsewhere. Same slant, same tail. And always in the margins, never in the main text. You make a new entry. Fish scribe 3 appearances, all unofficial. You sit back, pencil behind your ear, and grin like someone just handed you a mystery and a warm blanket at the same time. Then Lucilla appears at your elbow with 2 cups of something vaguely resembling cocoa. I think I found a bakery with the world's loudest sourdough, she says, setting 1 cup down and sliding a folded note across the desk. You open it. Inside a single line. Historians still argue whether crumbs count as citations. You laugh so hard you spill half the cocoa. That night, you reread the sister letter by candlelight. You think about all the people who've written letters that never arrived. All the women who left marks in margins and believed even faintly that someone might read them. You run your finger along the edge of the parchment and whisper, I see you. It feels like the right thing to say. The candle burns low. The night presses gently against the windows. You copy the letter one last time, then fold your notes and tuck them beneath your pillow, just in case dreams want to read too. You dream of dust and ink again. Only this time, the ink runs backward, spooling into quills, lifting from parchment words, gathering midair like soft birds returning to roost. You feel them brushing your arms, your hair whispering something that isn't a language but still makes sense. When you wake, it's still dark out, but something inside you hums like morning. You lie there for a while, staring at the ceiling, letting the memory of script dreams slowly unravel. Then with a stretch and a breath, you rise. There's tea to steep and more names to find. Today, you're meeting with an elder from the Fulani community, a quiet woman named Maya, who's agreed to talk only if you ask good questions and don't interrupt her lunch. You respect that. Maya greets you with a nod and a slow smile that somehow makes you feel instantly 10 years younger and 2 times clumsier. She pours tea with the confidence of someone who's poured it for longer than you've been alive, and then settles in beside a stack of notebooks so weathered they might as well be wood. These, she says, patting the pile, are the leftovers. You raise an eyebrow. From what? She shrugs. From everything. It turns out Maya's family has kept oral and written records for generations, not all in Arabic or French, but in Fulfulde Songhai, and sometimes even a Jami script, written in surprising swirls across fabric, bark, and rice paper. She hands you a sheet, faded, folded, but yes, there's something there. A poem. No author, except at the end in tiny script a single word. A name. Sokna. Your heart catches. Maya watches your face and nods like she knew that would happen. She was one of ours. No title, no husband, just stories. You copy the name down carefully, then ask if there are more. Maya chuckles. Oh, child, there are always more. The trick is knowing where to look. She means it literally. The next hour is spent pulling papers from the oddest places, a bread tin, a teapot, the back of a wooden spoon, yes, seriously, and one scrap you find inside an embroidered pillow. You piece them together, lines of dialogue, proverbs, a recipe for rice with mango and ginger, all in the same looping hand. All marked Sokna. It's like finding a friend you didn't know you'd lost. Historians still argue whether these scattered pieces of text qualify as literature, or if they're just domestic annotations. But Maya shakes her head at that idea. Anything written with care, she says, counts twice. You believe her. Later, as you sort through your notes in the shade of a date palm, you try to build a timeline. But Sokna doesn't follow timelines. Her scraps don't fit into years. They fit into feelings. A passage about planting rice, a prayer stitched into the lining of a skirt, a lullaby rewritten so that every fourth word is a name of God. You sit back, close your eyes, and whisper the lullaby aloud. A child giggles nearby. Maybe they heard. You like that idea. Back at the archive, you type up what you found. Lucilla's nearby, frowning at a document that appears to be a song about millet. Gaius is predictably sketching a new way to store parchment using spiral-bound gourds. Corvinus. He's found an old journal that references clock-shaped bread and is now insufferably smug. You pause mid-sentence because something catches your eye, a page from an unrelated folio. But the handwriting is unmistakable. Sokna, only this time it's different. More formal, inked carefully. Signed, Sokna Diallo, keeper of memory. You stare at it for a long time. Then you stand. Go find Lucilla, and without saying anything, point to the page. She reads it once, then nods. Finally. Finally what? Lucilla smirks. She gets a title. The rest of the day is spent cataloging, translating, cross-checking Sokna's scattered verses with regional calendars and oral stories. You find overlaps, mentions, echoes. One elder even recalls a story about a woman who wrote prayers on stone and left them by the river for God to read as he passed. You believe that was her. That night you gather with the others in a quiet courtyard, lit by small clay lanterns. There's bread, of course, Corvinus insisted, and warm drinks. Someone reads aloud from Sokna's lines, not because it's official, just because it feels right. The wind moves softly. The stars blink patiently, and time feels braided instead of linear, like Sokna is there, not as a ghost, but as rhythm, as memory, as one more voice in a long humming chorus of women who wrote anyway. You glance at the note Maya gave you before you left. It reads, "You're not uncovering history. You're letting it speak." You fold it carefully, place it in your notebook beside Sokna's name, and whisper once more, "Thank you." Morning feels different now. Not louder, not brighter, just fuller. Like you've stepped into rhythm instead of being dragged by it. You stretch, roll your shoulders, and smile before your eyes even open. Because today, your work continues. And not in an archive this time, not in some dusty room where knowledge naps between folders, but in the world itself. The next stop is a quiet compound just outside Timbuktu. Yes, that Timbuktu. The one everyone jokes about being impossibly far away. And yet here you are on a little clay bench beneath a baobab tree, listening to birds trade gossip in the branches. Across from you sits Fatimata. She's chewing something that smells like mint and clove, wearing a head wrap the color of late summer, and flipping through a stack of old-school notebooks. "They're not mine," she says. "They're hers." You nod. "Whose?" She points with her chin to a weathered photo propped on a nearby wall. A woman in a patterned robe, arms crossed, eyebrows lifted like she's questioning you from beyond the grave. "My great-aunt. She taught girls. Arabic, yes, but also Bambara Fulfulde French. Even some English. And these you gesture at the notebooks. Her lesson plans. Her letters, her dreams. The notebooks aren't fancy. The covers are torn, the pages warped from humidity. But the contents, gorgeous. Verses written sideways along the margins. Personal glossaries of botanical names. One essay labeled, "What the Moon Reminds Me Of, Answer Everything." You read slowly, carefully. Each entry has a voice, sometimes funny, sometimes sharp, always confident. She signed them Aisata the scribe. Fatimata watches you carefully. She wanted people to remember, she wrote. You nod. "I will." And you mean it. Because this isn't just recovery. It's recognition. Historians still argue whether women like Aisata should be labeled as scholars or simply influential family members. But standing under this tree with ink-stained pages spread across your lap, it's not even a question. She was both. You flip to a page where she's diagrammed different ways of keeping time: sun shadow, moon phase, animal behavior. At the bottom, she's scribbled a phrase in 3 languages, none of which you translate fluently, but you get the gist. It says, "Don't forget the women who watched the sky." You won't. Later, you share the story with Lucilla and Gaius over breakfast. Gaius wants to make a song out of it. Lucilla suggests baking something lunar-shaped. Corvinus, predictably, is halfway through inventing a sky calendar bread mold. You're not sure if he's joking, but that's not the important part. The important part is this: you're not alone anymore in remembering. The next few days take you deeper into conversations. Grandmothers recall scribes with quick hands and quiet smiles. Traders speak of market women who wrote inventory on their arms in chalk. A passing imam remembers an old auntie who composed blessings for childbirth in 3 dialects and etched them onto calabash bowls. You jot it all down: the names, the places, the fragments. Some of them are just that, fragments, a broken piece of poetry, a saying passed down with no origin. A woman remembered for her beautiful numbers, but even fragments build bridges. And this bridge, it's wide, because forgotten doesn't mean vanished. It just means waiting. You start drawing a map, not a geographical one, but a web, each name leading to another. Some thin threads, some ropes, some so tangled they feel more like vines. You step back and look at the web, blinking. There are more names here than you thought. Sokhna, Aysata, Zainabu, Aminata, Geneba. Some marked only by initials, some by stories, some by rumor. But all real, all writing. The last night of your journey you camp under the stars, not because you have to, but because you want to. You lie back on a woven mat, staring at constellations. You think of that phrase again: don't forget the women who watched the sky. You imagine them doing just that. Writing under oil lamps, writing between chores, writing prayers, writing resistance, writing recipes and records and requests to the divine. Not because anyone told them to, but because they could. A wind brushes through the trees, soft as a page turning. You close your eyes. You hear ink. You hear breath. You hear time being carried forward. Not loudly, just enough. And in that quiet, you feel it again, that pulse of the scribes. The ones who stayed unnamed too long. Not saints, not martyrs, just women with good pens and better memories. You whisper their names into the dark. Let them echo back, like the faint scratch of a quill, like footsteps in sand, like the hush before a bell, like the warmth before dawn. The return home is quiet. Not silent, your luggage rattles a little, and someone nearby is snoring impressively, but internally you carry a stillness that wasn't there before. It's not jet lag. It's something gentler. Like your brain has learned to breathe slower. You unpack slowly, each item a breadcrumb from the journey, a smooth river stone. Someone pressed into your palm, a scribbled notebook filled with names and phrases you still can't quite pronounce, a crumpled flyer from a local archive you never did find again. You sit with these things, not to analyze them, just to hold them. You light a candle, not out of necessity, but to remember what the flicker felt like in those monasteries, those villages, those late-night corners of dusty rooms where story and time met quietly and asked no one's permission. And then, like the scribes you've come to admire, you begin to write. Nothing grand, just notes, memories, little phrases like, "She said her aunt wrote by moonlight," "bread shaped like the eclipse," a child asking what scribe means. You don't write to publish. You write to preserve. Because if there's one thing this whole sleepy pilgrimage has taught you, it's that being remembered doesn't always require monuments. Sometimes a name in the margin is enough, a folded cloth passed between hands, a whispered phrase beside a drying ink pot. Historians still argue whether West Africa's female scribes had true institutional power or simply wielded influence in the margins. But margins, as you've learned, are not empty space. They're breathing room, places where meaning waits patiently to be heard. And here's what's beautiful, now you're part of that margin too. You remember Lucilla's bread shaped like a bell. You remember Corvinus muttering equations beside a sundial. You remember your own hands in candlelight, learning how rhythm is not always a sound, it's a promise. A promise to begin again, to listen again, to name what others forgot. Because this history isn't over. Not even close. The pulse of the forgotten female scribes of West Africa still beats soft but insistent, like a drum pressed to the earth. And you've joined the rhythm. Welcome to the circle.